Tonight on First Tuesday.
They are searching for us. God has to help us.
British justice, what it means for Tamils on the run in Sri Lanka. And the sinking of the Royal Oak. Yesterday's enemies remember.
30,000 tons of sort of majestic power. And there she was like a bird with a broken leg leaning over to one side.
The East German refugees streaming through the Iron Curtain in recent weeks have prompted a glow of self-congratulation among countries in the West. But when the refugees aren't escaping from communism, when they're not white or European, what then? Well, tonight we're going to look at the sort of welcome that Britain gives to Tamil refugees fleeing the bloody violence in Sri Lanka, formerly Ceylon. The island is in chaos. There's a civil war in the north and a separate war with nationalist guerrillas in the south. Recent reports have spoken of massacres, torture, of the press ganging of children into one or other army. What country could close its doors to people fleeing from those conditions? Conditions in which First Tuesday had to film undercover. Conditions to justify a well-founded fear.
The former British colony of Ceylon. Few tourists come here now. The once gentle island of Sri Lanka is being torn apart. Guerrilla warfare in the north. Extremist nationalism in the south. Violence splits the community and exposes ordinary people to terror. The capital, Colombo. For the last 4 months, it has been living with assassination, curfew, and a state of emergency. Among thousands in Sri Lanka living in fear of their lives, this is the story of 2 men who should not be there at all. Skandaraja ran a soft drinks business in the north. Vathanan was a schoolboy. They are both Tamils. In Sri Lanka, their circumstances may not be remarkable, but these men are special because they're at the centre of a conflict between the British government and British justice. They went to Britain to seek asylum as refugees, and Britain sent them back. The Home Office deported them, but a British court ruled that they were genuine refugees and should immediately be given asylum. Yet 6 months later, they remain in Sri Lanka, living in a succession of safe houses. We found them in Colombo, still hiding.
Here we are terribly scared. If we are arrested, we shall not be spared. After all this publicity, they're on the lookout for us. We are also on the run from one place to another. If we are caught, we don't know what will happen to us.
Sri Lankan newspapers, they publish that they are searching for us. God has to help us.
Vathanan and Skandaraja come from Jaffna in the north of Sri Lanka, the centre of a 10-year civil war for a separate Tamil state. In 1987, the Indian Army sent in a peacekeeping force. But relations quickly broke down between the Tamil Tigers, the main guerrilla group, and the Indian forces. 3 months after their arrival, the Indians launched a full-scale military attack around Jaffna. 2/3 of the city was destroyed. 5,000 civilians were killed or injured. Since then, guerrilla war has gripped the province, with ordinary civilians in the front line. Young men are routinely press-ganged into one of the paramilitary groups that exist on either side. The only alternative is to get out. Skandaraja and Vathanan were caught in the middle.
Extrajudicial killings, beatings, robbery and violence of one kind or another have taken place by both sides during these operations. Many people have lost their homes, parts of their families, certainly their occupations, and feel that their very livelihood and their families are at risk. There's essentially an undeclared war going on. Young men are particularly at risk. They are often taken to camps where they are held in incommunicado detention for a period that may range from a few days to months. There have been, again, a regular series of allegations that young men taken in this way have been subjected to physical torture.
The war ruined Skandaraja's business in Jaffna. His house near the city centre was destroyed by shelling.
Because of our house's damages and because of the army operation, our family decided to send me abroad from Sri Lanka, and I couldn't stay there.
Skandaraja went first to Colombo. But police came to the place where he was staying and arrested him. They took him to a police station and interrogated him about why he had left Jaffna.
They started to assault me and they kicked me. And because of the kick, I fall onto the fence. There is a barbed wire.
Skandaraja was trampled onto the barbed wire. 2 years later, the scar remains. Vathanan, too, had experienced the force of the war. Before he sat his O-levels, his school was bombed by the Sri Lankan Air Force. So was his home.
On January 1st, our house was bombed in the night and it was completely destroyed. My father and I ran one way. My mother and sister went another. I haven't seen them since that night. When I think of them, I'm deeply grieved. I do hope they are still alive. I was desperate to get out of the country because things were bad there, and also because I feared for my life.
Vathanan fled from Sri Lanka in February 1987. He left before Skandaraja. He decided to seek asylum in Britain. The people with the power to grant it to him were the British immigration officers in London. To be given asylum, he had to prove a well-founded fear of persecution at home. But when his flight reached Heathrow, his passport was taken away.
I think you have to understand the psychology of the immigration service in this country. It is made quite clear to them that the presumption must be that people will not get in rather than they will get in. And especially people who come from third world countries, people who are black, people who are poor, tend to have a very much worse time, and that prejudice is ingrained deeply.
Vathanan was locked up in a government detention centre. A week later, after questioning, he was returned to Heathrow. On the bus, he and the Tamils with him were handed letters of deportation. But Vathanan then became one of 58 Tamils who staged an extraordinary demonstration.
They were asked to get down from their bus, which they did in a normal way. But then they removed their clothes and threw down their bags.
Others lay down on the runway. Some stormed the flight deck of their plane. The pilot refused to take off and the deportation was halted. The demonstration was successful. The High Court now granted the 58 Tamils time to stay in England while their cases for asylum were considered. There was a hostile reaction to the decision from Conservative backbench MPs.
Many thousands of people in this country will be angered that these liars, cheats and queue jumpers are going to have the right to be considered to allow to be stay in this country.
queue jumping in the sense of getting into the country, queue jumping in the sense of getting accommodation before the indigenous population and others here. Liars because they tell one story that can't be held up when it's tested, and cheats because they lie to get something that they're not entitled to over and above and before the rest of the community. And I stand by those words.
Terry Dick's opinion was echoed by the government. Home Office Minister David Waddington.
It was quite obvious from the examination carried out by the immigration officers at the port that the claims made by these particular people were manifestly bogus.
But in the 2.5 years since Mr. Waddington's remarks, no evidence has been produced to support those allegations.
Indian boss! Indian boss! Killing boss! Indian boss! Killing boss! Indian boss!
Tamils in England have consistently demonstrated against the war, the Indian presence and violations of human rights in Sri Lanka. To qualify as refugees from that war, the 58 Tamils did not have to prove that they had already been imprisoned or tortured at home. The well-founded fear that asylum seekers have to prove is of persecution because of race, religion, nationality or political opinion. That is the UN Convention on Refugees. It is binding on Britain. It was for the government to decide, from their knowledge of the situation in Sri Lanka, whether the 58 Tamils had the necessary well-founded fear, or whether, as some alleged, they were just out for a better life, economic refugees.
I think the Tamils are a perfect example of the abuse of the definition of fear of persecution, if you like. Many of them are just con artists, in my view, who want to come to the UK for a better life and maybe the chance to get something for nothing. And they use the refugee status as a method of getting into Britain.
It's nothing to do with wanting a better job or a better life, economically. I think it's completely wrong to call them economic refugees.
Desmond Fernando, educated at Oxford, trained in London, is now president of the Sri Lanka Bar Association, one of the country's top lawyers. He is not a Tamil.
I speak as a Sinhalese, but I would say about the Jaffna Tamil that life is impossible for them in Sri Lanka. They leave Jaffna because they are not safe, they are in danger. Britain, with a long tradition of freedom and tolerance, should take in the Jaffna Tamils, and that Britain will not regret such a decision.
Skandaraja didn't want to come to Britain. He was not one of the 58. He had a ticket to go to Canada, and in June 1987 arrived at Heathrow in transit. He got no further. British immigration officers became suspicious about his travel documents. Skandaraja was held at Herrmannsworth Detention Centre, and only then did he ask for asylum in Britain.
We see that we have no choice. Because of that, we asked asylum in United Kingdom, and they kept us in the prison.
His application for asylum was rejected in August 1987. His solicitors were not told. They heard it instead from the press, who had been briefed by the Home Office.
The government did everything in its power to prevent those cases coming to court and to make sure those people went back to Sri Lanka. The cases were dealt with in a peremptory and cursory way. People bearing the marks of torture were called manifestly bogus applicants. People were taken to the airport in buses so that if we lost one hearing, we wouldn't have time to get to another hearing before they'd be whisked away.
Throughout the months of legal wrangling, Skandaraja and Vathanan were locked up in a succession of detention centres.
We were never told why we were being moved from one place to another. Only when we reached the destination were we told the purpose of the move. Till then, we were scared.
We leave Sri Lanka to reach any safe place, but when we reached England, we could start again struggling. And every day each of us started to talk about this. This is the only pastime. What will happen to us, we couldn't predict anything at all.
One of their detention centres was a sea-link ferry. the Home Office leased the Earl William for immigration detainees and anchored it off Harwich. The media called it a prison ship. While on board, Vathanen became ill. Doctors diagnosed an ulcer. But for both men, the worst experience was at Latchmere House, Richmond.
When I was in Latchmere, I was 17 years old. Latchmere House is the worst place I was kept. 2 of us were confined to one room for 16 hours a day. That was another cause of stress. We had nothing to do during these 16 hours. We were given only 1 hour a day for exercise. At the age of 17, you want to be outside. We were always upset.
And it was at Latchmere House that Skandaraja spent the last 6 of his 8 months' detention in England. He recalls the letter of protest he wrote to the immigration authorities.
We are not come to cheat you or anything like that. We came here to survive, to safeguard our lives. Why can't you release us? We expect at least for the Christmas they will release us. But they take non-action, and on that day, terrible feelings. I never expect that condition from the Englishman.
But at Christmas 1987, the case reached the House of Lords, and the Home Office won. The lawyers had only been able to challenge technicalities. At no time were the facts of the cases considered. For Skandaraja and Vathanen, it was the end of the line. They now had to attempt something no one had ever managed to do: appeal from the very country from which they were fleeing. That was British law.
I would say it is a very unsatisfactory law, because people leave their countries owing to the fact that life is impossible in those countries. And sometimes more than impossible. Life is frightening. And to ask someone to go back to a country where life is frightening, I think is horrible. I think it's a very unsatisfactory law, and it should be repealed. These were not the laws that I learned when I was in Britain. Perhaps unfortunately in recent times, Britain has been forced to make laws which are not in keeping with the best traditions of British law.
But the law was rigid. Skandaraja, Vathanen, and the other Tamils with them were to be deported back to Sri Lanka.
A couple of police officers traveled with us. First they came to Latchmere House and they handcuffed us. And on that time we started to cry. We never expect that we will be handcuffed in such a country.
We invited the Home Office to take part in this programme, but they were unable to provide a spokesman. However, they stated last month, in relation to this case, that they remain committed to a liberal and humanitarian spirit in the treatment of asylum seekers. But in February 1988, there was no relenting on the deportations. The Home Office returned the Tamils to an uncertain future in Sri Lanka. The consequences for Skandaraja were immediate. His freedom at home in Jaffna lasted for less than a day.
After I reached Jaffna, I went to my home, and I feel very happy to see my family and united with them. Next morning, I like to go to market, so I cycle towards market with a basket. On the time I looking around Jaffna, how is it? And at that time I reached one place. There is army is blocking all the persons and checking.
Skandaraja was arrested and taken to an army camp. He was interrogated about the Tamil Tigers.
After that, they attacked me, beat me at my back with pipes, I think maybe filled with sand or something. If I don't tell anything about it, they said you won't be released, you will be killed, something like that. I am very frightened. Without knowing anything, what can I say? I don't know what to do. I don't know whether my family knew about this. Even if they kill us, there is nobody to ask the Indian army, why did you kill?
He doesn't like to talk about it, but I know, for example, that when they were particularly scared, demoralised, under pressure, they would cuddle each other. I know that they used to listen to the sound of soldiers' feet coming towards the door and be in absolute terror about who was going to be taken. And when it was someone else who was taken, they were glad. They were really glad. And then, of course, after that, they felt dreadful about having felt good that somebody else was being taken to be tortured. This was a horrific period, and it has made a deep imprint on him.
I don't know what to do, what to answer. Without knowing anything, how can you answer anything? All the times we don't know what to do. Very much frightened.
After 10 weeks in prison, Skandaraja's father bribed an Indian officer to obtain his son's release. Once again, he fled to Colombo and went into hiding. Vathanan had fared little better. His Sri Lanka identity card had been taken from him in England. The British police told him it would be handed back in Colombo, but the Colombo police denied all knowledge of it. The British immigration authorities eventually admitted it was lost. Without his ID card, he could neither live nor work openly in Sri Lanka. Within weeks of arrival, he was arrested twice.
Because I did not have the identity card, I was arrested and taken to Peta police station. For half an hour I was beaten up, kicked and beaten with a belt. They kicked me in the stomach. That night I was put in a cell. I did not sleep. My head hurt and I had severe pain in my stomach. The next morning I was taken for interrogation and beaten up again.
The kicking brought back the ulcer he had developed in England. On his release from the police station, he had to be admitted to hospital.
Yeah, okay. Would you be happy to go straight into this without a rehearsal?
Yes.
While Skandaraja, Vathanan and 3 other Tamils removed with them went into hiding abroad, lawyers Chris Randall and David Burgess decided to appeal against their deportation.
We felt very attached to the individuals because we'd known them a long time while we were fighting their cases in the United Kingdom. We felt very strongly that these were good cases with good facts and these people were refugees, and we decided that we would go over and take the information from them firsthand. It was clear that we were going to do everything we possibly could, quite beyond the normal services people might expect to get from their lawyers, to make sure that if it was at all possible, they got back, or at least that the government had to face the facts of what they had done.
The Immigration Appeals Court, Thanet House, London. The case was heard in January 1989, almost a year after the 5 men had been sent back to Sri Lanka. Here, for the first time, a court heard what had actually happened to them. Notably, the Home Office, whose ministers had publicly denounced them, now offered no evidence against the 5 men. The judge, or adjudicator, was Geoffrey Kerr. he was to make a startling decision.
The adjudicator's determination was a remarkable event. The adjudicator held that all five were entitled to asylum at the time of the Secretary of State's decision, therefore the Home Secretary was wrong. He held that the circumstances had not changed materially since, and he directed that all five be returned with a minimum of delay. The effect of that was that the refusals were in breach of the Convention on the Status of Refugees. They were illegal.
There was a feeling that here at last someone had looked at the facts of these cases and had cast an unpolitical, uncynical eye on the facts and basically applied the UN Convention. That's what it's there for.
The case made legal history, but the Home Office did not comply with the order to return the 5 men to safety without delay. Instead, the Home Office appealed. It kept the men in Colombo, waiting in fear as the violence moved closer. Another 4 months passed. Vathanan had come out of hospital and, like Skandaraja, gone underground.
Since I got back here, I haven't found my parents or my sister. I had a lot of hardships in England before being sent back here. But if they allow us to return, we shall go. There it is safe. Here, our lives are in danger.
At this hostel in Colombo, Tamils too scared to show their faces have taken refuge. Their dream is to go home to Jaffna, but for the present, they look to Germany, Canada, whoever will take them. Few hold hopes of the mother country, Britain. In the last 18 months, the Home Office has sent back 80 Sri Lankans. In July this year, lawyers for Vathanan and Skandaraja won a second victory when the High Court told the Home Office it could no longer deny the men leave to enter Britain to fight their case. But the Home Office is still resisting. It still disputes the court's ruling that the men are genuine refugees and still contests their right to asylum in Britain. The case has opened up a split between the courts and the government at the highest level. When the Tamils temporarily won a reprieve in 1987, Home Secretary Douglas Hurd went on the radio to protest.
The decision of the Court of Appeal leaves us, I think, in a very serious position. In Germany, for example, they have a subjective test, rather like the Court of Appeal is favouring, and they had 100,000 applications for asylum last year compared to our 4,000. I really don't think in common sense terms we want to get into that position.
This so annoyed the Master of the Rolls, Britain's most senior judge whose decision it had been, that he broke with convention to speak out in court.
As far as I could make out, either no one had read the judgment, this I am bound to say included the Secretary of State who broadcast on the radio, or they did not want to understand the judgment.
Home Office figures show the number of people given full refugee status has dropped throughout the 80s to fewer than 400 a year, and 70% of all applications have been genuine.
So the characterization of Britain's refugee population as bogus is potentially misleading and can only act as a justification for a harsh and repressive asylum policy that's designed to act as a deterrent.
There hasn't been a great floodgate problem, but I'm afraid to say the Home Office attitude is if there are more than one or two, there is a problem and they've got to be stopped. Now, that is no way to decide whether or not somebody really does have a well-founded fear of persecution in the country that they come from.
I don't know how to prove to United Kingdom Secretary of State we are in well-founded fear. What is the meaning of well-founded fear? I was arrested by Sri Lankan forces and they tortured me. And even in Indian army as well, arrested and tortured. After that, what he is expecting, I have to kill myself and prove that I am in a critical condition.
In Britain today, there are more than 400 Tamils like Skandaraja, Tamils facing deportation who fear persecution at home. They have gone into hiding underground.
No one is going to recommend this, but it must be obvious to everyone that that will become a very real possibility. And it's not an attractive possibility. It's a very hard, pressured existence.
Ronnie Moodley helps run a secret organisation, the Underground Railroad, a Christian network prepared to break the law for refugees.
Against injustice, sometimes we have to put our lives, our motives on the front line. And if situations happen of being against the law, then we expect to appear in court to explain that what we are doing it not for our own selves, but it's protecting other people.
This man is one of the hidden refugees, a man who, according to the Home Office, has no right to asylum in Britain.
I had been arrested at least 7 times by the Indian Army. I was interrogated, drenched in water, and beaten on the soles of the feet. On the last occasion, they subjected me to painful electric shocks. They made me lie on my stomach and attached an exposed electric prod up my rectum. The soldiers threatened me with death unless I led them to the hideouts of the militants. I had no idea where the militants were, but in order to escape torture, I pretended to lead my captors to the hideouts. They released me after that. When I reached the UK, I asked for asylum. The immigration officer informed me that my circumstances did not qualify me to seek asylum in the UK.
Then news reached him from Sri Lanka that Indian soldiers had been back to his home. They had shot and killed his brother and abducted his 16-year-old sister. She has never been seen since. These events were corroborated by an independent witness. The Home Office said they were sorry to hear this, but a civil servant wrote, "I am afraid it does not alter our view that he himself does not have a well-founded fear."
The Home Office decided that this man was not a refugee. In my view, quite an extraordinary decision. I cannot see any basis for that decision. Of course, it is for the Home Office to explain it, but it must show the complete lottery of the system. And to my mind, it must be very understandable why that man felt obliged to go underground.
He was ordered to report to Heathrow for his flight, but he never did.
I had not planned anything. I made my decision only after hearing the verdict of the court. I decided I had to do something to avoid being deported. Had I gone back to Sri Lanka, I would have been arrested, tortured, or possibly put to death. It's almost a year since I went underground. I have no idea what to do. I can't seek employment or continue my education. I'm fearful to go out and spend most of my life indoors. Before I came, I was very hopeful of being secure here. I thought I could rebuild my shattered life in the UK. I totally failed to understand the action of the British authorities. I have no idea what my future will be. Since my family has been almost wiped out, my only hope is to stay here.
But there's some hope for Vathanan and Skandaraja, told last March that they could return to Britain. We've just heard that the 2 men, with the others in their case, left Sri Lanka early this morning to come back and seek asylum. But it could be a long process. They may not win. They could be sent home again. In a moment, the first ship of the Second World War lost in British waters, and the extraordinary friendship which sprang from it. That's after the break. Welcome back. 50 years ago, Taff, Davies and Herbert Herrmann were in the business of killing one another. Taff was on the HMS Royal Oak, sunk with the loss of 833 men. Herbert was in the U-boat which sank her. Yet this was the incident which would bind them together. Close friends now, they tell their story in Hearts of Oak.
The vast waters of Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland. In 2 world wars, it has been at the centre of dramatic events. The scuttling of the German Grand Fleet in 1919 and, shortly after the outbreak of the Second World War, Scapa Flow saw one of the most audacious feats in the history of naval warfare, the sinking of one of Britain's biggest battleships, HMS Royal Oak. The wreck is the largest war grave in British waters, the last resting place of more than 800 crew members, killed when the ship was torpedoed by a German U-boat. For half a century, there has been a daily leakage of oil, a grim reminder of October the 14th, 1939, when the Royal Navy's defences failed. Today, in another part of Scotland, lives U-47's torpedo mechanic, Herbert Herrmann, now a British citizen. His war ended when he was taken prisoner in 1944. After the war, he settled down in Scotland and married a local girl. He is a proud member of the Royal Naval Association, and 22 years ago, he formed a remarkable friendship with ex-Royal Marine Taff Davies, today a widower in his mid-70s. A member of Royal Oak's crew, Taff was one of the very men Herbert had been trying to kill in Scapa Flow. Each year, on October the 14th, the ship's sinking is commemorated in 2 places. In Scapa Flow, Royal Navy divers raise a white ensign over the wreck, and in Portsmouth, survivors and their families gather to remember the dead. Among the mourners are members of U-47's crew.
Almighty and most merciful Father, we meet again by thy grace to remember and to mourn our shipmates lost in HMS Royal Oak. Grant them eternal peace, O Lord. And the next wreath is in memory not only of the men of the Royal Oak, but also the men of U-47 who were lost when she was sunk in the Atlantic in 1941. And this wreath will be laid by Herbert Herrmann, who was a torpedoman in U-47 when she penetrated the flow. Lay the wreath, please, Herbert. Some people are critical of the fact that we have German submariners at our reunions, and especially as these submariners are the people who sank the Royal Oak. But to me, they were engaged in a perfectly legitimate military operation against a military target. O eternal Lord God, who alone spreadest out the heavens and rulest the raging of the seas, we, thine unworthy servants, do give thee most humble and heartfelt thanks for our safe deliverance from the dangers of the seas and the violence of the enemy.
50 years ago, the enemy was Nazi Germany, and Herbert Herrmann, aged 19, was about to join his first U-boat.
When I got on the U-47, I just wrote to my parents that I was on a submarine and probably will be shortly going out.
In great secrecy, U-47 moved out into the North Sea. The captain ordered the submarine to dive. Then, on the seabed, he told the crew of their mission.
He said to us, we go to Scapa Flow. Well, everybody knew what Scapa Flow meant, and nobody spoke. and everybody looked at each other. And as it was my first trip, I thought, good God, wrong boat. First trip and don't come back.
Scapa Flow is a great expanse of water, and it's got a sort of a necklace of islands around it. The spaces in between the beads of this necklace are blocked, or should have been blocked, by block ships laid across the channel so that nothing could get in.
The raid to Scapa Flow, it was all wiped out for the height of a tide. And at a certain height, we had to get in, and at a certain height, we had to come back out again.
The crew placed explosive charges around the U-boat in case they were captured.
So we all knew if something went wrong, we would bail out and blow the boat up. Once the boat was ready, we went on battle station and we surfaced. We entered Scapa Flow between two block ships, and then we were in.
Lying at anchor with 1,200 officers and men on board was the flagship of the 2nd Battle Squadron, HMS Royal Oak.
I served in 9 ships thereabouts in my time, and I have never experienced a more miserable and unhappy time in my life than I did in the Royal Oak. It was the worst ship I ever served in. The trouble started from the top. The general atmosphere was that the officers regarded the lower deckmen as scum, nothing more. And in fact, there was very little difference in their attitude before the war from what there had been in the old time of Nelson's day, except there was no flogging. We thought that once we got inside Scapa Flow, we were perfectly safe, except perhaps from aircraft, but certainly we never occurred to anybody that submarines could get in.
We fired a salvo of torpedoes, and they were lost.
I was on the upper deck at the time. Thank God I was on the port side, just above B turret. And I just made up my mind, as a matter of fact, to go back to my hammock.
We reloaded the tubes, and in record time, we returned, and the captain fired another salvo.
And the first one seemed to hit abreast of A and B turrets, and the second one hit us square amidships, and the third one hit us just about where my hammock was waiting for me to go back in it. And I thought, this bloody ship's going down.
We tried to get out of the door, which opened inwards, but we couldn't, of course, because of the press of weight of bodies on the door. However, it was opened eventually, and people rushed to the upper deck. There was a lot of screaming from below, a lot of noise of machinery and other movable objects taking away or taking charge and falling down to the low side of the ship.
And I thought, well, the next thing, Taffy boy, is you'll get necked too. So I walked up the steeply sloping quarterdeck, climbed over the port guardrail, and went down. Didn't exactly walk because it was too slippery underfoot, the ship's side, but I sort of clambered down the ship's side on my haunches, sort of thing. I stood up, looked around, and the drifter, Daisy, was a little bit further aft than I was. So from there I actually walked on the ship's side until I came abreast of the Daisy, and then I took a jump, got hold of the Daisy's guardrail, and hauled myself inboard without even getting my feet wet.
One could see in the distance just a glow, and we made at full speed, to the same place where we came in. And the current was that strong that the boat stopped at full speed, and the captain shouted 10 more, 10 more, 10 more. That meant on the diesel 1 knot more. And suddenly the current eased off and we just shot out.
And we looked up at the side of the ship. She was over about 45 degrees then, a terrible sight. 30,000 tons of sort of majestic power. And there she was like a bird with a broken leg leaning over to one side. And sitting on the side of the ship, there were quite a lot of men. And we in the drifter were looking up at these and thinking, why the hell don't they jump? And while I was watching these fellows, I heard the voice of an officer. And I shall remember this to my grave. And he was saying, wait for the order, abandon ship. And the people in the drifter were saying, listen to that silly sod up there. And that's what it was. And so they waited for the order of abandon ship. I think he was still saying it when the ship turned over.
I was in the water, which was freezing cold, and there was obviously no sign of being rescued. And Daisy, too, was going further away from us, or from me. So it was obvious that I was going to die. Then a boat came alongside from the Pegasus. A voice said, here's 2 more, and dragged us in the boat.
Churchill, recently returned as First Lord of the Admiralty, had already warned the Navy to strengthen the defences at Scapa Flow. Now, news of the loss of over 800 men aboard Royal Oak was brought to him by his young Assistant Secretary, John Hyam.
And the words I remember very distinctly was, he said, as only he could say it, those poor men, struggling in those dark depths. And tears came to his eyes.
We had no first aid kit. We could do nothing as regards first aid. We was taking them aboard and laying them down in the deck, and they were dead before they even fell down. All around us were crying, people crying, in agony, flesh torn off their bodies. Some coming aboard with their pajamas on, some half naked, covered with oil. It was like taking aboard black people. Their faces were just covered with oil, coming from the Royal Oak.
3 days later, Churchill went to the Commons to make a statement about the sinking of the Royal Oak. And a remarkable thing about that is that he, although this was a terrible blow, he was able to pay tribute to the remarkable skill, professional skill and daring of the submarine commander.
When we came home into Wilhelmshaven and seeing all these people and cheering and all the admirals who were there, bands playing, newsreel cameras, we couldn't understand what was all the fuss about. Hitler sent his private planes and we were all flown to Berlin as he wanted to receive the crew personally. When we arrived in Berlin, there was a fleet of the Chancellery cars which took us to the Hotel Kaiserhof through a mass of cheering people. We were received in his study, and the captain gave his report. Führer congratulated him. Hitler shook hands with everybody. I was introduced as the youngest member of my crew. It was a great honor to be received like that. And I was only worried here how to get what to my parents.
The sinking of the Royal Oak perhaps brought home more than anything else at that time that we were in for a very grim struggle.
The shocked and bedraggled survivors from Royal Oak were ferried next morning to Thurso, the nearest town on the Scottish mainland. At short notice, they were billeted with local families.
The local people of Thurso could not have been more hospitable. We were billeted with the local grocer, Mr. Shearer, who had an 11-year-old son, Creer. I've always kept in touch with Creer, although I've never seen him since.
They were in a complete state of shock, and they were in nothing but their boiler suits and plimsolls when they came to us. Some of them had still had bits of oil on them.
They treated us extremely well, as all the people of Thurso did to all the survivors. It was something that I will never forget.
The sinking of the ship brought it home vividly that we were really at war. And then the arrival of the survivors in the town brought it home with a great impact. We were at war.
Survivors of the battleship Royal Oak have returned to their home depot to be issued with new equipment and to await instructions to join a new ship. Out of the darkness of this dreadful tragedy, the buoyant spirits of the men who were saved shines brightly. These streets have known many tragedies in wartime, and the joy of the relatives welcoming the survivors is tempered with the bereavement of more than 800 men who died.
Many of the women who waited for news then still gather in Portsmouth for a happier occasion, the annual reunion of survivors from the Royal Oak.
49 years today, incidentally. Lovely to see you.
Heard all about you.
Have you?
Yes.
All to the bad, I suppose.
Clear Shearer from Thurso.
Oh no!
It's a long while since we've met.
I'm sorry.
How did you do?
Nice to meet you. After how long is it?
39 years. 49 years. 49 years.
All this time.
That's right.
And you were, what, 12, 11 years old?
In short trousers.
Yes. You still have the... Oh, no. Look at that. Good grief. Isn't that something? Hello, Gerda. Nice to see you.
Hello.
Hello, Harry. Nice to see you.
I was going through a portal when she turned up and I fell back and went down with it.
Yes.
And came up.
Well, he told me that. He told me that.
Good to see you again.
It always be unusually. Oh.
You look very young.
She's only saying that because it's true.
It's a night to remember for heroism, but a night to forget for sorrow.
There's been a few changes in that time.
And you were still there, further?
Yes.
Changed a bit, I think.
Oh yes, it's trebled in size.
For us.
Now, half a century after the sinking of Royal Oak, Taffy and Herbert, one-time enemies, return to the scene of their first encounter.
The boy is glinted in the sun.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, look.
Yeah. There we are. Herbert is a very nice man. He's a kind man. He's a good family man. I've been up to his place 3 or 4 times, spent holidays with him. He and his wife and my wife were great friends. Yeah, it's a bit dodgy, but so am I, mate. A little bit dodgy. He is now a naturalised Briton. And the fact that he was born in Germany and the fact that he took part in the sinking of the Royal Oak, to me, is pure incidental.
It is calm today, eh?
Yeah.
And that can be very rough, I believe.
Yeah, it certainly
Doesn't make
can.
no
Let's hope it's
difference.
as good tomorrow as it is today.
But the sea doesn't make no difference between nationalities.
Yeah.
That's one thing for sure.
rough's rough, whether you're German, I tie or British, mate.
That's true, that's very true.
Still, it don't look too bad for tomorrow. Let's hope. You know, Herbert, there were you 50 years ago, trying to knock 7 different kinds of something or other out of us. And now, there are you, to all intents and purposes, an out-and-out Scotsman. You speak Scottish more Scottish than the Scots do. It's a strange world, isn't it?
It is a strange world in a way, yes.
Yeah.
But one sees here, of course, circumstances are the cases.
Yeah, it was.
And my circumstances were such that after I was taken prisoner of war and after being in a few camps, my father advised me if I like it here to stay here. I met my wife, Aina, and
that's it.
She just put us right.
Yeah, they usually do, don't they?
They do.
We learned a lot from the stupidity of the past, but we're not the people who are going to look after the future.
No.
The people who can look after the future are the kids of today. And no kid ever learned, no kid ever took advice, no kid ever learned. Matter of fact, a bloody lot of politicians never learn from history.
That is true, that's very true.
So certainly the kids won't.
If politicians had to fight the war,
there wouldn't be
any.
That's a bloody fact.
There wouldn't be any. And I wouldn't like my son to go through what I had to go through.
No.
But neither my grandson.
Oh dear, oh dear. So peaceful, isn't it?
It is.
So peaceful. All those bloody blokes lying down there. Oh, a silly old sod I am. I think seeing that notice on there finished me off.
It does.
You know, this marks the wreck and the resting place of our crew. I'm getting bloody old and stupid, I think. I'm getting bloody old, that's a fact. And stupid with it.
We all get older.
Yeah. We don't all get as bloody stupid as so do we?
You get sentimental.
Yeah. Down there somewhere is my hammock still slung. way for me to get back in it.
Now you were lucky.
Yeah.
Old enemies, now old friends, mourning the lost sailors of the Royal Oak. Until November, good night.